Okay, we have now started recording as well. Well, thank you very much, dear panelists, for being here. And thank you very much for all people who have either attended right now or people who will be watching this recording later on YouTube. Today, we will be hosting a webinar session on recruitment through research purposes, recruitment through social media for research purposes. We have already organized several sessions before on participant recruitment through social media. On the other hand, the experiences with social media is changing fastly. Social media is changing, users' habits are changing, cost structure are changing, and so on. So we think it is beneficial to continue holding these sessions so that we can learn about more recent experiences. Also, in today's session, we are hosting people who conduct different type of research in different parts of the world with different groups. So it will again be very useful, I think, to listen to experiences of these people, these scholars. We will go one by one. I will first start with Nadia. So thank you very much, Nadia, attending us. Nadia, a very short bio. Nadia has received her PhD in political science from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, very recently in August 2023. Her research areas, her areas of interest include international migration, public opinion, and political behavior and conflict. And her work has been published in Journal of Peace Research and Economics of Disaster and Climate Change, as well as other publications. Thank you very much, Nadia. We will have around 12, 15 minutes for each of the presentations. And then once everyone is finished, we can just do a Q&A session. Okay, the floor is yours. You can just go ahead.
Great. Thank you so much for the introduction and for inviting me to share my research. Today, I'm presenting my experience recruiting niche survey respondents through Facebook. So I'll just start with giving a little bit of background on the project and what this survey was for and why I was using Facebook to recruit. So this project was my dissertation project, which I completed last year, which was titled Transnational Actions, Domestic Outcomes, How Diasporas Affect Change in Their Countries of Origin. And so I was interested in essentially how migrants experience their country of origin post-migration, how the migration experience influences their political behavior. So this was a larger project, but for the purposes of the survey that I used Facebook to recruit for, my research questions were, do migrants in autocratic countries of residence absorb different norms than those in democratic countries? And do these migrants then systematically transfer those norms to people in their countries of origin? And my expectation was that the norms transfer would be conditional on whether the migrant was living in a democratic country of residence, in which case they would absorb and transfer democratic norms, versus those in autocratic countries of residence who would absorb and transfer or strengthen autocratic norms to people in their country of origin. So for this project, I focused on the Arab world as a site of both immigration and immigration. So the Arab countries, a lot of people leave to go to democracies in Europe, for example, or the US, Canada, and so on. But there's also a large amount of migration that is occurring within the Arab world towards the autocratic Gulf countries. And so it was that distinction in the experience that I was interested in seeing how migrants are affected by that. And I wanted to have a cross-country study, and I took advantage of a shared language and culture that enables more of that cross-country comparability and still having some generalizability as well. I was interested in using survey research because migration is fundamentally an individual level phenomenon. And just in general, I'm interested in individuals and how individuals react and how individuals perceive politics. And I was hoping that, or part of the larger project was to trace some kind of a causal process that links individual experiences with state level differences. So I created the what I call the Arab Migrant and Diaspora Relationships Survey, which asked several questions regarding contact with between migrants and people in their countries of origin. So frequency of visiting, frequency of speaking to people, sending and receiving money and goods, as well as topics of discussion, including political topics. I asked about their attitudes towards democracy, towards censorship, and towards the incumbent government of their country of origin. So it was focused on migrants, but focused on their attitudes towards their country of origin. The behaviors I looked at were expat voting, donating, campaigning, and protest behavior, again directed at the country of origin. And then, of course, a series of demographic questions as part of the control variables. So that's just a brief summary of the project, just to give you a sense of what this was and what was sort of the purpose of it. And I used, of course, Facebook to recruit survey respondents. I actually, attended these sessions a couple of years ago when I was working on this, and I used the handbook, and it was super helpful. And so I'm excited to share what I ended up doing. So I used a conversion campaign using Facebook ads. So the call to action here was just to click on the link in the ad that would lead to the survey on a different platform. And I created the survey itself, and I have my own website that would transfer survey respondents to the website once they've completed the survey as a way of, and then that was the call to action. So Facebook would record that somebody had visited my website. I received funding from the American Political Science Doctoral Dissertation Research Improvement Grant. I received $11,000. And I used all of it. Not all of it was towards the Facebook ads. I did use some of the money for other purposes related to the survey, but I would say that approximately $10,200 went towards the survey and the Facebook ads exclusively. So it was certainly the bulk of the grant. And the ads ran from about mid-September 2022 to the end of December 2022. So this is where Facebook really came in handy, was focusing my audience. So obviously I'm looking at a very niche audience. I'm trying to capture migrants of a specific background. And so Facebook had a very useful feature in that it allowed you to select by expat status. So it's actually one of the, I believe it's the behavioral characteristics is expatriate. So I selected that. There's also a feature where you can select people based on if they have a hometown that's different from their current location. So I use that as kind of a proxy of being a migrant. As well as to focus then on people who were from the Arab countries that I was interested in, an Arab country. So this would be under interests, and then you would select the various countries. I created multiple ad sets. So I had separate sets targeting people in Western countries versus non-Western countries. And I also targeted male and female respondents separately, because I was really concerned with getting at least representativeness from the gender aspect, knowing that I would not be able to get it in other demographic characteristics, as I'll show you in a minute. So this is how I used Facebook to recruit. This is a sample ad in Arabic that I used to recruit. You can see it's under Center for Migration, Demographics, Demography and Population Studies at UNLV, who the organization kindly allowed me to use their website, so it wouldn't just be sort of me and not looking very official. And the ad says, "We want to know more about Arab immigrants and expatriates around the world. Share your experiences with us in 10 minutes in this online research survey." This was one ad that I used. I used a couple of different ads with different pictures of people on their computer, for example. I believe one of the photos also had a woman in a headscarf. But I actually found that this was probably the better performing one. The ones that had, and in general, the ones that had real pictures rather than icons or cartoons tended to do better. Okay. So here is a list of the number of respondents by country of origin. I got about 1,000 plus responses to the survey, but 639 of them were complete. And as you can see, I had, some from autocratic countries of residence and democratic countries of residence. So the targeting did do its job. So that was certainly very helpful. So I wanted to show some of the demographic distribution of the respondents, so you can kind of see how the targeting worked in terms of what respondents I was able to recruit and so on. So as you can see, and unsurprisingly for an online survey, and this is what I expected, skewing heavily younger, and sort of the under 45 category was the most represented, but in general, the respondents were very young. In terms of education, again, and this is what I expected, there was a heavy emphasis on people who had higher levels of education versus lower. And then this was of a particular importance to me because I had the expectation that people who had lived in their country of residence for longer would be more affected in their political beliefs. And so, as you can see, most of the respondents have lived in their country of residence for a very long period of time, more than 20 years, and many since birth as well. And this was particularly interesting. I had expected to get a more even distribution, but that's not what ended up happening. But it's also interesting because it didn't seem to affect much the responses that I got to the attitudinal and behavioral question. So it was an important characteristic for me to observe in my research. So to sum up my overall experience using Facebook, I would say the benefits, what for me especially, were the ability to target my audience. I actually did speak to several survey companies to do something like this. And they all were like, this is going to be very difficult to get the audience that you are looking for. And it was going to be very expensive. They could only look at, a limited number of countries. Anything more than that would have been, just prohibitively expensive for me. So obviously, again, the Facebook ads campaign used up like 90% of my budget, but it was still significantly lower cost relative to what I was being quoted. And in terms of the size of the sample, it was comparable to what some of the survey companies that I spoke to were offering. So I felt that it was very successful from that aspect. I had direct control over the recruitment process, and I can talk a little bit more about this. But because I made the campaign, I made the ads, I made the targeting, all of that, I was sort of the person. I got to, be the person who was completely monitoring, managing, and making sure at every stage that it was doing essentially what I wanted to do. So throughout the campaign, I was able to check, for example, and see how many female versus male respondents was I getting, and make adjustments to that. So I found that I needed to invest more money in the ads that were targeting female respondents because I was not getting a large enough sample. And so eventually, by the time it was over, I had about I would say, a 50, 52-48 split male to female. So I actually ended up having more female respondents than males. And that was in large part because I was continuously checking and making sure that everything was working out. So that was helpful. I mean, obviously, if you worked with a survey company, then they would do that for you. But I personally felt it was good to have that control. Some of the challenges, obviously, it's a non-representative sample, as you could see from the demographics that I showed. But that's something that's going to be a problem in any online survey. It's not unique to Facebook. So for me personally, I went in knowing that this was going to be a concern. And so I wouldn't necessarily call that a disadvantage because it's going to be something that you have to deal with regardless, as long as you're doing an online survey. It does require daily management. So again, obviously, if you use a survey company, then you can sort of set it and forget it. But with the Facebook campaign, I found that I had to check it every single day, check the demographics that was being collected, I was making adjustments, I would say probably weekly to the pricing structure of the ad campaigns, especially in the very beginning. I was cycling through a lot of different variations of the ad that I showed. And I will say, as you saw, it says Instagram ad. So that was another benefit to using Facebook, is that it spread across platforms, and it's not like an option you select, it just does it automatically. But I ended up cycling through a lot of variations of the ad over the course of the first few weeks, before I could figure out which was going to be the most successful in terms of attracting my respondent sample. So it's definitely something that you have to budget the time for as well. And I will say that, Facebook troubleshooting is extremely complicated. I ran into a lot of problems in the beginning, and it is pretty much impossible to get a human being to talk to you at Facebook. Eventually I did manage to work things out, and I did manage to speak to a human being at one point. So that wasn't too bad. But it is certainly something that, especially in the beginning, was a bit of a concern for me. So I would say that if you are doing something like this, just sort of be aware that especially in the beginning, you might run into a lot of problems, and be prepared to have the time, and make sure that, especially in terms of your time frame for actually running the survey, there were a lot of days that I lost in the beginning because I was having these sort of technical difficulties. And so that's something that you would want to take into consideration when you're sort of deciding your time frame, is what I would advise. Yeah, so that is my presentation about my experience recruiting niche survey respondents. I'm very happy to answer any questions, and you can always, anyone if would like to speak to me further about this experience or my project can certainly email me as well.
Thank you very much, Nadia. This was great. And we will come back to these issues in Q&A session. So now we will continue with Adriana. A very quick bio of Adriana. Adriana is a Marie Curie Fellow at the University of Bucharest in Romania, and at the Department of Sociology and Anthropology, and an Honorary Senior Research Fellow at the University of Glasgow. She received her PhD degree from King's College London in 2011 and worked in British and Dutch academia until she recently returned to Romania, her native country. And her research has focused on some of the ways in which housing and home are permitted by and shape our ideas of politics and power, space, place, emotions, and embodiment. Her most recent EU Horizon funded project investigates the experiences of private tenants and landlords in Romania. She has published more than 25 articles in renowned academic journals. Thank you very much again for Adriana, and the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
No. Okay, thank you so much. I could thank you for organizing this wonderful seminar series, and thank you for inviting me today to just share a few insights from my work. What I want to speak of, it's about my use of the online qualitative questionnaire, which sometimes I call it the online written interviews, because it's a rarely used method which provides such a rich data and also country coverage, which is important in certain research questions. And I also want to talk about my use of Facebook groups as a way of targeting the relevant subpopulation at no financial cost, because I did it manually. So I use this method, a qualitative questionnaire, in 3 projects. Project 1 about tenant activism in itself, and then in project 2, Romanian migrants in the UK, and project 3, tenants and landlords in Romania, in itself, but also as a way of recruiting participants. And you can see that in the first project, I had 60 online questionnaire with providing me rich data, but that I wanted to increase. So in the second, I went to 88, in the third to 114. And as a measure of the rich data this method brings, I show here that in project 1 and project 2, I was able to write one report and one journal article and one method case study without any thematic overlap between them. And in the third, I have now 3 articles under reviews. And if you worry that funders might not accept this method, there is no need to worry, because this method was part of my proposal for the EU Horizon project, which I was happy to win. Here you see the country coverage that I obtained in the 3 projects. It was important for me to go in the whole country. Not all the regions were as well represented, but I had diversity, enough diversity for my analysis, and also in terms of large and small cities, but indeed rural places were underrepresented, as we know that happened in online research. So we have to use it to those research questions in which the urban matters. So the first thing that you start with an online qualitative questionnaire is designing it. And I wanted to show here a bit of insight of how I framed my question. So I use a key open-ended question, which I put it in bold lettering. Example, please tell us your reasons for renting privately. Or thinking about your entire rental experience, please describe the process of finding the desired dwellings. And just like in any semi-structured interviews, I suggested probes. So in the first, my probes were more or less structures, as we see in the first example. Tell us as much as you can, including whether your reasons have changed over time. But in the second example, you see that I structured them very well. Even I count them to make sure that my participants refer to those points. So once you have your questionnaire designed, then the distribution work kicks in. And I use Facebook groups because I wanted to reach this particular population. So in the first project, I used 2 Facebook tenant community groups, which were hosted by major tenant unions. In the second project, I used 55 Facebook groups. I was a migrant in the UK, but I didn't know that this Facebook group existed. But when I started my project, I just started to type Romanians in London, Birmingham, Glasgow, and everywhere there was the Facebook group. In my last project, I use 80 Facebook groups in order to reach a very, very tiny population, because in Romania, only 1% of the populations are private tenants, and then the landlords are even a tinier share. But again, I just typed rent in Bucharest or Timișoara or Iași, and there were the Facebook groups through which people find a place to rent. I also used national pages such as Bet Tenants or directly from the owners or real estate pages. As you know already, for these Facebook groups, some are open, so you can just put your ad. Other requires membership. Other requires to explain who you are, but I wasn't refused to join any of this. Now you see that it does take some time to achieve your numbers. In the first and second project, I needed 3 months to achieve my numerical target. In the last one, I allowed for 7 months because my project had different work packages, so I was able to start earlier and be relaxed with the time frame of this survey. So how I did it? I promoted it about every 2 weeks in a very transparent method. And I noticed that the phrase, we got 30 responses, could you help us reach 50, was very useful because participants want to help when they know that their voice matters. And it's a different thing to be 1 in 50 or 100 sample, as opposed to be 1 in 1,000 or 2,000 sample. I also kept discovering new Facebook groups because I didn't want to be too insistent in just one. I changed my visual ad once to attract the attention to participants, but also to show that I'm interested in my own project and I work for getting their attention. So it is free. It doesn't take much of your time in this period, but it takes overall time until you reach the quota that you want. And okay, I say I can't move now.
You should be able to. It must be an issue with your computer.
I moved. Yeah. So here I wanted to show some ads, and you might see there in bold. I said we have 49 responses now. Can you help us reach 100? And now we got 81 responses. Can you help us reach 100? And finally, we got 90 responses. Can you reach us 100? Your answer, your response matter. At the end of my questionnaire, I had the screen to invite participants into an interview. So generally 50% of my participants accepted. But for instance, in my last project, this meant 50 respondents who agreed, but it was summer and attrition over the summer holidays large. So I only could conduct 23 interviews. You might think that that's disappointing. I maybe was disappointed, but then I realized that it was to my advantage because I started recruiting again in the same Facebook groups, but then I could target the cities. And here I show my ad for the interview. I must say I had a demanding interview because it was the interview itself, but I also asked for photos of participant home. I also asked for a handwriting of the housing history of the participants. I could also later on target by gender and by role. For instance, in the last one, I only needed 2 participants, which were private tenants. And this helped me to improve my interview sample and position it at the best compared to the survey sample. So I spoke only of the merits of this method, and the method brought me diversity in terms of age, in terms of income. In my Romanian migrant project, I even had responses from homeless people in terms of household types. But the method, as opposed to Nadia, brings over-representation of women. About 60–70% of women were in my sample. Women are more willing to complete a qualitative questionnaire. And I had to defend this point in some papers. And it also overrepresents the higher educated and the urbanists. Obviously, I forgot to say, a part of my open-ended question, I also had some closed-ended question to collect social, economic, and demographic data so that I could look for the patterns in the data. as any qualitative studies, the sample is not generalized, it's not representative, but this doesn't matter, it never is in a qualitative research. So you have to be careful, and you can generalize based on theories and diversity, but and you also have the advantage that you can, by targeting, to improve the sample and the variability of your sample. You see there I listed a method paper in which I describe my approach to what I call the online written interview, aka the qualitative online questionnaire, in detail. And with this, I thank you for your attention. Again, yes. I thank you for your attention with this nice picture. And here I listed some of the paper I was speaking, the methodological, the articles, and the reports. Thank you. I'm looking, I hope that I get some questions.
Thank you very much, Adriana. This was really useful. This was, I think, the first also presentation we have hosted regarding the recruitment through Facebook groups and also regarding qualitative interviews. So in this sense, it was quite new and it looks very useful. Thank you very much. And there are some questions. We will come back to your presentation as well. But finally, before that, we will be listening Philippe and his presentation on participant recruitment through advertisements in Germany. So thank you very much, Philippe, for joining us today. Philippe, a very short introduction, is a postdoc at the University of Potsdam, and he's also chair for comparative politics since last summer. And before that, he has obtained his PhD at the University of Münster. He has worked for the PRECEDE project from 2020 to 2023, and he's interested in populism, political parties in Germany. Thank you very much again. You can just go ahead.
Thank you. And also thank you for switching the dates, and sorry for the chaos that I caused. I'm very happy for the opportunity to present the research that I'm working on, which is very much work in progress. So I'm looking forward to your comments, and I hope you will find something useful from that. So I'm mostly talking about a sample that I've been conducting through Meta, so Meta recruitment. And I'm comparing the results of my survey with another survey that my two colleagues, Konstantin and Martin, did. And we were interested in the Bavarian state elections last year in Germany. So we are talking about the regional sample. And the overall question is, how good is the meta sampling strategy actually? And we thought that it would be helpful to use sort of the two sampling techniques to compare them and to see to what extent we get different results. I think I chose a similar approach like Nadia, so I won't repeat all of that, but I think, by the way, I also attended lots of your webinars, which were very helpful for me. And we learned a lot about meta sampling strategies, how it could be done efficiently, and that they are quite cheap. You get quite a lot of control, like Nadia said already, over your survey. It's also more work. I also realized that, but I really like the opportunity to do this fine-grained micro-targeting. But the question is always like, at what price does that come? How reliable is the data? How good is the data quality? That was the main question that I was asking in this sort of research. Obviously, I also have some substantial research interests about the variables that I put in the survey, but this is what I'm focusing on today in this presentation. So as I said, I was interested in the Bavarian state elections, and I did a post-election survey, which was, I managed to get around 2,700 respondents after the election. And my recruitment was sort of like a two-step process. So in the first part, like first half of the survey, fielding time, I targeted let's say the general population, so without any restrictions. I used the pixel technique, the conversion technique that was mentioned here before, to maximize the number of respondents. And after half of that time, I also, similar to Nadia, assessed the quality and looked which voter groups are underrepresented, compared it with census data. And I ran then multiple parallel pixels, which was a bit difficult, wouldn't really recommend that. So it's always easier to just focus on one. And I saw that CSU voters, so that was the voters of the largest party, women and young voters were underrepresented. And I used the micro-targeting to reach out to them. The budget was around 1,500, and I also invested 150 euros in lottery. That was especially mentioned in the white paper that you produced after the webinar series, which was, I think, quite helpful, but it's a nightmare to get the reimbursement for that. So be very careful, talk to your university before that. Yeah, we can talk about that later if you like. So the reference, that is the study of my two colleagues, was a quota sample by a sampling by a poster company, Vilendi. And it was much more expensive, around 4 times more expensive than my sample. And also that was just, so the data was a quota sample based on online households. So because it's quite difficult to reach or quite expensive to reach the older cohorts, that was restricted to only respondents below the age of 70. That meant, compared to my sample, I already had to lose around 800 respondents because otherwise we couldn't really compare the results. And they got a sample size of 1,700. And yeah, as I said, it was much more expensive. So that is always something that you have to keep in mind. So the comparison that I'm looking at right now is, well, of course, between the meta sample and the quota sample. And I would assume that the quota sampling is more accurate because, well, it already the participants have been selected based on their socio-economic responses that they have been given before. So the pollster should know like where these people come from, and they are trying to build a very representative data set. And of course,
Philip,
yes.
Can I just ask a clarification question here? So in this quota sample, people are selected through in-person surveys, right? Like not initially, I mean, included in the sample through in-person, face-to-face surveys or not?
So when I'm talking about the quota sample, I'm talking about the
quota sample.
Yes.
Yeah.
The study of my colleagues, and they went to a polling company, and they have a panel, and they were just saying, no, we need 1,700 responses. They should be representative of the online population, and in order to be able to afford that, we will just ignore people above the age of 70. So it comes from a panel, yeah, and those are people who get incentives, so they get money for responding to these kind of surveys. Also, for some variables, of course, I can compare them to the actual results, like the election result, for example. And there is also from the German longitudinal election study, which was a probability sample in 2021, there were also some items that were similar or identical, which we can also use for this comparison. That, of course, should be the highest possible data quality. The problem is that it was 2 years earlier, so some things may have changed, and it is quite small. The Bavarian subsample is only around 700 people. So yeah, just to keep that in mind. So yeah, let's start. Let's go to the results. So I'm now focusing on that was actually in the probability sample 2021, and my data is red, meta, and quota is the data set of my colleagues. And you can see in the meta data set, political interest people, respondents are overrepresented, especially compared to the probability data. That it was not something actually very surprising. So I think that makes a lot of sense, especially because the incentive is not so high. I mean, with the lottery, of course, there is an incentive, but yeah, that was not super surprising. And if you think about this as large or minor difference, I think it's up to you, but it's definitely there and should be taken into account. If we look at the actual election results, now it's a bit more difficult because red is again my meta sample, green is the sample of my colleagues, and blue is the actual result. I had a post-election survey, my colleagues had a pre-election survey, so that already is a bit difficult. But what you can see is that the largest voter group, the CSU voters, they were underrepresented in both of the samples, especially my sample. Green voters, on the other hand, were overrepresented. AfD voters were also overrepresented in both samples. And what is maybe quite interesting for you is that I was more successful in targeting non-voters. So if you want to study non-voters, maybe Facebook or Meta is the best way to grow. So of course, much less than compared to the actual election result. But as you can see, also almost twice as much compared to the quota sampling. So that was a positive surprise, I would say. Obviously, that also calls for weighting procedures. So if you want to do the analysis, that should be taken into account. Now for the other results, I will just focus on my sample and the sample of my colleagues. The design is now changing a bit because it's, well, the memory word, sorry about that. So now you have to look at, on the left side, already weighted the data and try to compare it. I think it's not super useful and the differences are not super strong. But on the left side, you find my meta sample, and on the right side, you find the sample of my colleagues. And that is the left and right self-placement on the economic dimension. And you can see if you look on the right side, on the quota sample, it doesn't really follow a normal distribution, but well, the extremes are quite strong actually, but at least around the center, you see that there's the mode. Whereas in the meta sample, it's a bit more chaotic. So it is sort of a bit left leaning, but on the other hand, you also see that especially in the unweighted data set, there are a lot of strongly right-leaning, neoliberal economic respondents. Now, if we look at the cultural dimension, you see a similar pattern for the quota sample, and it's even more chaotic for the meta sample. You can see, well, it's a very weird pattern. So you can see that the center is quite underrepresented. The left-leaning and the not the like centrist right, but the very right people are also quite strongly represented. I mean, this could, depending on your research question, I think this could be an advantage or a disadvantage, and something that you should definitely be careful about. Now, satisfaction with democracy is actually something where the differences are not too big. So that was positively surprising, I would say, because I would have thought that the dissatisfied people are even like more prominent on Facebook compared to the quota sample. So that was more or less all right. Importance of democracy, surprisingly, in the meta sample, that was even higher. That may have to do something with the definition of democracy. So maybe people on Facebook find that find it very important that they have something different about democracy in mind. But I would just well, leave it here as a picture of its own, so you can think about that. Now, propensity to vote for the AfD, that was also surprising because we have seen that radical people are quite overrepresented, and you would assume that AfD is the radical right party in Germany, that people who are more prone to this party are also more likely to be found on Facebook. And that seems a bit to be the case if you look at the high scores, but if you look at the low scores, you see that there's basically more polarization. So I would say I was surprised that the patterns are so similar. I would have expected that the Facebook and or generally Meta users are more prone to voting for the AfD. Trust, we have several trust questions. I would just focus on a few. Trust in parties is a little bit more skewed to distrust, I would say. So it's more balanced in the quota sampling, but you can see that also here, like there are very few people actually that highly trust parties. So it's not so different after all. Trust in the federal government, that is actually more skewed towards distrust. So you can see, I mean, it's a hot topic in Germany, and it seems like that if you are distrusting the federal government, Facebook is a place where you can meet your allies. And yeah, that is much more balanced in the quota sampling. Yeah, some conclusions. So you could see that in some aspects, you saw this sort of more radical respondents on Meta. It was almost exclusively Facebook. So I saw the breakdown in the ads, but it was like, I don't know, 95% Facebook and only 5% Instagram, especially trust in parties and the federal government. And there were also more respondents from the fringes of the political spectrum, if you look at the economic and the cultural dimension. But actually, that was not the case regarding the satisfaction with democracy, also not with the AfD necessarily. And non-voters could be reached to much higher numbers on Meta. So that was a very good surprise. And of course, you always have to keep in mind that the Meta sample was much, much cheaper. So it was only around one quarter of the cost of the quota sample. And I think this is, yeah, this is the main factor which you have to keep in mind if you compare the two. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philip. That was very useful. I was actually impressed with how close those two samples were. I mean, of course, there were differences, but if you look at the general structure of distribution, they were very close. And given that most people use, I mean, most of us use these samples for either experiments or, regression. So we are not really using for population estimates. It looks to me that both of the samples would probably produce similar results. So yeah, I think very important findings. Hopefully you will share those findings in print somewhere. Okay, thank you very much, all three of you. We have some questions. I will go over the questions again with the same order. First of all, and for participants who are listening to our conversation right now, we will again upload the entire conversation on YouTube. So if you have to leave early, that's fine. You can just follow the rest through the YouTube video, and we will share the link to YouTube video with participants of if you have registered for this event. Okay, so Nadia, first of all, there is a question for you. I will just read it. Thank you very much for your presentation. That was always an idea I thought about, like just studying democracy, support for democracy across migrants in different countries. It's great that you have done it. I am excited about learning the substantive findings of your research as well. So one of the questions here is about accessibility of Facebook. Is Facebook accessible in all of the countries you are interested in? This is a good question. And Fiona adds that it is not, it's blocked in China. So which countries it was not accessible? I just want to add one more question to Fiona's. What kind of differences have you seen across cost when you conducted your surveys across countries? So, for example, when I conduct surveys, I find that in Western countries, wealthier countries, it is much more expensive to recruit respondents compared to Turkey, for example. Have you also seen that kind of a difference across Western and non-Western countries?
So I didn't have any problems in terms of Facebook or any of the Meta social media websites being blocked anywhere. And actually kind of looking back at my experience now, I wish I had paid more attention earlier on to where the responses were coming from. I was very focused on the migrants themselves and their countries of origin, and trying to get sort of an even spread. But although there was no problem with accessibility in countries of residence, there were some pretty big differences that I noticed about, I would say maybe like about a half or 2/3 of the way through the recruitment sort of time frame. And I actually found that I got many more respondents from the Western countries than I did from the Arab countries, which was actually a surprise to me. And I very much expected it to be the other way around. At the time, I had pretty even pricing across the Western and non-Western categories. And I ended up actually putting more money into the non-Western categories because I wasn't getting the responses. Looking back at it, I do think some of it was the nature of the survey itself. So I think for people living in Arab countries in the Gulf, having it be sort of advertised from an American university was maybe not encouraging respondents. The questions, I mean, I really formulated the survey to be fairly politically neutral. I don't ask about political preferences. I ask just about the political behavior itself. But it's certainly possible that people in the more authoritarian Arab countries were less interested just in general to participate in something like this, but also less willing to sort of complete the response as well. So it's kind of interesting that you said that because I ended up having kind of the opposite experience where I had way more, especially Germany and like the Scandinavian countries. I had like a big skew, and I had to change my strategy and tactic about sort of midway through to adjust for that.
Thank you very much. By the way, in Arab countries, was the problem that many non-migrants also signed up for the survey, or did you have that kind of a problem?
Nope,
Selection problem?
I was surprised, thought it would be an issue. So some of it was, the title of the survey was, migrants and diasporas. And then once you actually start to answer the questions, if you are not a migrant in the country, you will not be able to answer some of the questions. And so I think that also helped, some people sort of self-select out. I did get a handful of them, but not anywhere as many as I thought I would have to adjust for.
Okay, thank you very much for your responses. I had also conducted one survey for migrants, and I can just add for participants, it's also a good strategy. If you are conducting your survey, for example, let's assume that you are targeting Arabic speakers and you are conducting your survey in Turkey, then it's a good strategy to deliver your survey to Arabic speakers. From language settings, you can choose Arabic as the language. And since only people that are Arabic speakers, or to a great extent, have migrant origins, your survey will be delivered directly to those people. And I think it also decreases costs significantly. Thank you very much, Nadia. And I will continue with questions to Adriana. So we have two questions, Adriana, about ethics. One is that, I mean, maybe you have read already the question.
Them,
I will
yeah,
just,
yeah,
I will just read it for our participants in case they cannot read it. So one of the questions is that the problem is that our participant asking question was told by ethics department that if they post a general post, they must accept all volunteers, but then they needed to have a criteria for accepting people because they cannot accept people who are not efficient or proficient in English. So is there a way around that issue? Another question is whether what are the ethical issues related to collecting information on potentially sensitive subjects like activism? It's a concern given that Facebook may collect and combine data based on who is clicking on links related to a certain subject, and is there a way to mitigate this?
Okay, so I will start by saying that I'm a long member in the ethics committee at the University of Glasgow, and there are ways of doing research on any research question. You just have to be fair, but you can target the group that you want. In terms of tenant activism, actually, an online qualitative questionnaire, it's really the best because it's full anonymity. You don't even know who that person is. And apart of that, you can get opinions from what I called also everyday activists. So not only the core organizers of a tenant union, but those everyday activists maybe like you, like who we do certain things, but in a more quiet way. In terms of how you select your participants as long as you are open. You see, I had my target first, like tenants and landlords. But then later on, I targeted. I said, I only need tenants, or I only need female tenants, and so on. If you are open about that, there is no problem with the ethics. But on a question, the question that you ask, if you accept or not people whose English is not so good, that depends very much whether if it's in the questionnaire, so I would say no reason not to accept them, or if there is in the interview. And if there is in the interview, and it's important to your research question, because this might be excluded people and so on, then maybe you can make an effort to get some translator if you want to get that group of people. And I saw that I also had a question
one more question.
on Facebook group members.
Pushback from Facebook group moderators. Did you get any pushback from Facebook group moderators?
From
Please go
Valerie.
ahead.
Yes, Valerie, a few people did not want to accept my request after I presented myself, but generally there were like 3 or 4 groups in a city, so I still was able to reach, say, the Romanian migrant. In the Romanian migrant project, I didn't have any problem with the membership, so they were willing to accept any person who would go there in the group. But in the tenants and landlords project, these were more guarded by membership. And if we think in the US, when I made a Facebook page of my project, I was told that housing is a sensitive issue by itself, which you don't think in Europe that it's like that. I mean, everybody can express their housing experiences. So generally, it was positive, my experience with group membership, and I was some 10%, no, 5% maybe not accepted. But that wasn't a problem because, as I said, there are so many Facebook groups in every city.
Thank you very much. We have received one more question for you. What did you use from Selin? What did you use for presenting your qualitative questions? Qualtrics, other software, Facebook discussion posts?
Okay. So I was happy to be part of the University of Glasgow, and I used how you call this? What I had access to. So first I used the British Online Survey, and then I used the Qualtrics. They have pro and con. I like in the Qualtrics that they allow participants to upload visuals. So I asked for photographs, and I got photographs and video, which was important for me. But there are other cons when you use Qualtrics, but doesn't matter. I think all are good as long as you have paid access to the university wall, because you want to ask enough questions. And just one thing I wanted to say, if you want to use online qualitative questionnaire, do not try to get too many numbers, because it takes so much time to analyze them. With 60, I had plenty of rich data. With 114, I'm a little bit overloaded with rich data. So
Thank you very much. Okay, finally, Flip, we have 2 questions for you from our respondents. Marielle asks about the procedures and tools you use to assess half-time quality.
Yes, so I ran the survey in Live Survey because part of that small grant that I got for the study was also that included hosting for Lime Survey, which is the cheapest option. I think it's much cheaper. You could also host it yourself, but yeah. So what I basically did was to export the data set, and then I already prepared a weighting script based on the census data, which is unfortunately quite old because I'm waiting for the new census data from 2021. But what you can currently do is to obtain the 2011 census data from Census Hub. And I mean, as always, it's just an estimation, so you should never expect to get like the whole truth from census data. So it gives you an idea where you're going, which groups are over or underrepresented. And yeah, so I just did the weighting, and then I looked at the strata with the largest weights and figured from there where I should do the micro-targeting. Yeah.
A question from Fiona. So any thoughts on whether these results from Germany are likely to also apply in other European countries?
So regarding the distribution or what sort of people you target with that, I have a bit of experience from the project that was mentioned. I know that in Eastern Europe, I mean, we have Adriana here from Romania, so maybe you can also talk about that. But in Romania, I remember it was very, very difficult to get the Social Democratic voters, because they are mostly from rural areas. And I think yeah, well, it always depends, like, how many people in a country are online and therefore also likely to be on Facebook. And that was always a problem in Eastern Europe, especially in Romania, so that there's very big rural divide, and that the respondents that you get are much more likely to be from the big cities, from Bucharest, for example. But to some extent, that was also a problem in Hungary. So there it was extremely difficult to get the Fidesz voters, although they are the majority, of course, if you look at the election results. So I would say in countries where you have like a lot of, where there's not really a discrepancy anymore between onliners and offliners, where like in the Baltic states, for example, where you have 90% of the households have access to the internet, there is almost no problem. Yeah, that is the biggest thing. And you should always look like how many people are actually on Facebook in a given country. In some other countries, it may be the case that other social media platforms are more popular. Yeah, but I guess with Facebook and Instagram, you already get covered like the biggest social media websites, so that should be fine.
So Philip, I just as a follow-up, across all those projects, have you used the same type of advertisements, that is incentive-based advertisements?
No, that was actually the first time. And as I already briefly mentioned, getting the university to pay for the lottery is extremely difficult because they frame it as some sort of gambling thing. So it's very weird. Getting them to pay for Facebook advertising is also very difficult, at least in Germany.
Yeah, that's true.
So be prepared.
Well, I think, yes, I think that's a very good point to raise. I think it varies a lot across universities. I had colleagues from Ohio University, US, or Oxford University, and in those universities, they were so comfortable paying Facebook receipts. You pay Facebook through your credit card, and those universities were very comfortable reimbursing to the credit card. Glasgow doesn't do that. So in Glasgow, we had to set up with finance. We are working through a company actually in Glasgow University, and Glasgow only invoicing that company, so it's more complicated in Glasgow. It changes across in universities. So Philip, yeah, you are right. Just one thing regarding the last question. I mean, I think in our surveys also we found that political interest is always or Facebook samples are higher in terms of political interest. Respondents recruited through Facebook are higher in terms of political interest. So apparently this is a thing. Using incentive-based advertisements decreases that bias, but apparently, I mean, your research has shown to me that even with incentive-based advertisements, people recruited through Facebook is more interested in politics than people recruited through quota samples. So I guess that's something to consider when thinking about these things.
If we have some time, I would like to add something, because I get the feeling that many people in the audience also want to do similar studies. And I think what we also should mention, not sure what the experience of you three are, but what you will definitely get if you run a study like this is very weird comments below the post, below the advertised post, but also very weird emails, sometimes even telephone calls. I got a journalist from, well, it was a serious newspaper, so it was no yellow press, but he wanted to do an article about my study, and it was apparently for them, it was also a big thing that I was not from Bavaria, but I was from another state, and so they questioned my authority. That was a completely different thing. But yeah, just to warn you, if you want to do this kind of things, that you will definitely get weird sort of contacts from people from Facebook. Just wanted to add that because it's never talked about.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I thought it was just about Turkey and people in Turkey who were being very skeptical about researchers, but apparently it is common across other
Yeah.
countries as well.
I had that problem as well, and that's part of the sort of the daily monitoring of it, where you have to see like what comments you're getting, and unfortunately, I have to say that on some of the ads that were targeted towards people in Western countries, I also got some racially charged comments from people who were not the target of the ad, and so I had to it was recommended to me, instead of deleting the comment, to just hide it. Because if you delete the comment, the person who wrote it receives a notification that you deleted it, and then they might sort of retaliate, I guess. And so I was recommended to just hide it, and that way nobody could see it, but you also wouldn't have some angry person yelling at you.
Yeah, please, Adriana, go
On
ahead.
the same note, just I want to say that I also received comments from the Facebook members, but I answered everyone. Everyone got an answer from me, but my sample was small, so I could do that.
We have one last question from Valerie. So Valerie is asking if anyone listening or anyone on the panel has experience with recruiting through LinkedIn. If possible, she says, would you mind contacting her through email? And you can see her email address through Q&A section. I think our participants can also see the email address. And Adriana, I think you will answer to this question.
Oh no, I wanted to say I don't
okay.
have experience,
Okay,
but
okay.
I think it's a very good question, Valerie. I tried to
Yeah.
answer it in typing, but I couldn't type
Okay.
in that because I noticed that so many people, moved from the ex-Twitter, from the current X to LinkedIn and others. So I think there is increasingly an advantage in LinkedIn to be used in research.
Yeah, I'm not aware as well, but if there's anyone among our listeners who have experience, we would be very happy to welcome them in one of our sessions, because yeah, it's I think getting more and more popular. Okay, that is all for now, and we are way beyond our time anyway. So I am ending the recording here, thanking all of our participants. 1 second. Okay, this is the end of the recording.